The city pulsed with life, a maze of honking cars, glowing billboards, and the constant rush of people chasing after something: dreams, money, or perhaps just survival. Among those blurred faces was a little girl named Eliana. She was 12 years old, small for her age, her frame wrapped in a faded dress that had seen too many seasons. Her shoes had holes in them, her hair tied back loosely with a string, and her eyes, though tired, held a light no hardship could extinguish. Eliana lived on the margins of this sprawling city. Her mother worked long hours at a diner. Her father had disappeared years ago, and Eliana often roamed the streets to help in whatever way she could, collecting bottles, offering to carry groceries, sometimes just humming tunes for coins. Life had taught her to survive, but it had also given her something rarer: empathy. She noticed things others overlooked. She saw the hunger behind a forced smile, the loneliness in someone's eyes, the invisible struggles money could not cover. One chilly evening, as the street lights flickered to life, Eliana found herself near the business district, where glass towers reached for the clouds. She liked watching them, imagining what it would be like to be inside, warm and safe, where people drank coffee from porcelain cups and never worried about the next meal. She hugged her thin jacket tighter, her breath turning white in the air, and started walking home. That's when she saw him. At first, she thought it was just another man on the sidewalk, leaning heavily against the railing by the park. But as she drew closer, she noticed something was wrong. He was older, dressed in a sharp suit that now hung awkwardly, his tie loosened, his face pale under the dim lights. His breathing was ragged, his hand clutched his chest, and his eyes darted wildly, as if searching for help. People passed by. Some glanced at him, assumed he was drunk, and kept walking. Others noticed, but chose not to interfere. The city had a way of making people blind to suffering. But not Eliana. She hurried closer, her small voice trembling. "Sir, are you okay?" The man looked down at her, sweat beading on his forehead. He opened his mouth, but only a strangled gasp escaped. His knees buckled, and before she knew it, he collapsed onto the cold pavement. Panic surged through Eliana's body, but instinct took over. She had seen something like this before. Her grandmother once collapsed from heart trouble. She remembered how her mother had pressed her chest, called for help, prayed desperately. "Don't move! Don't move!" Eliana cried, dropping beside him. Her tiny hands shook, but she pressed them against his chest, urging him to stay awake. "Please, don't close your eyes! Someone help!" she screamed at the crowd, but the footsteps kept moving, indifferent. Tears welled in her eyes. She leaned close. "Sir, stay with me. You can't go yet. I'll help you." With one hand, she fumbled for the old cell phone she carried, cracked and barely working. She dialed emergency services, her voice cracking as she gave the location. They told her to keep him conscious until the ambulance arrived. She didn't hesitate. "Talk to me," she begged him. "What's your name?" His lips barely moved. "David." "Okay, David, my name's Eliana. You're gonna be fine. Just breathe. Please breathe with me. In, out, in, out." She exaggerated the breaths, showing him. Her small hands patted his cheek gently whenever his eyes threatened to close. "No, no, stay awake. Don't sleep. You're strong. I'm here. I won't leave." Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. Relief flooded Eliana's chest as paramedics rushed in, lifting the man onto a stretcher, attaching tubes and wires. Before they closed the ambulance doors, David's weak eyes locked on hers. For a fleeting moment, gratitude and pain mixed in them, as if he couldn't believe this ragged little girl had kept him alive. She stood on the curb long after the ambulance disappeared, shivering under the yellow glow of the streetlight. No one clapped, no one thanked her, no one noticed the little heroine who had refused to look away when everyone else did. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and whispered a prayer for the stranger's life, and walked home quietly. Eliana didn't know she had just saved one of the city's most powerful millionaires, nor did she know that her life was about to change forever because of what he would whisper the next time their paths crossed. The next morning dawned gray, rain streaking the windows of the small apartment where Eliana and her mother lived. The room smelled faintly of detergent from the laundromat downstairs, mixed with the aroma of weak coffee her mother clutched in a chipped mug. Eliana said nothing about the night before. She didn't want her mother to worry. She simply carried her school books in a bag whose zipper barely worked and stepped into the drizzle, her shoes squishing against the wet pavement. At school, her teachers noted the same things they always did. Eliana was quiet, observant, and far older in her eyes than her years. She never caused trouble, but she often drifted off into daydreams, staring out the window as if searching for a horizon no one else could see. That day, though, her thoughts weren't in the clouds. They were with the man she had saved. Was he alive? Had he made it through the night? Would he remember the girl who pressed his cheeks and begged him not to sleep? On the other side of the city, in a pristine hospital suite lined with flowers and quiet beeping machines, David Montgomery awoke. He was the kind of man newspapers called untouchable, a self-made millionaire with empires in real estate, technology, and finance. His face had graced magazine covers, his words quoted by ambitious young men in business schools. But last night, none of that mattered. He had been a man gasping on the pavement, teetering on the edge of life, and he had been saved not by a doctor or bodyguard, but by a little girl whose name he remembered as clearly as if it had been branded into his chest: Eliana. When his assistant entered, carrying stacks of documents and messages, David waved them away. "Find the girl," he whispered hoarsely. "The one who called the ambulance. I owe her everything." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, there were no reports. She's 12, worn shoes, brown hair, name's Eliana," David said, his eyes narrowing with unusual urgency. "Find her." Days passed. Eliana returned to her routines, school, chores, helping her mother stretch every coin. She had almost convinced herself she would never know what happened to the man when one afternoon a black car stopped outside her building. Neighbors peeked curiously as two men in suits stepped out. One of them scanned the street, then crouched to her level. "Are you Eliana?" he asked gently. Her heart thudded. "Yes." The man smiled. "Mr. Montgomery would like to see you." Confused and a little scared, she followed them, her small hand clutching her school bag like a shield. They drove her across the city, into a world she had only imagined. Tall gates, manicured gardens, fountains taller than her apartment building. And finally, the grand entrance of a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, chandeliers, paintings worth more than her entire neighborhood. But none of it mattered to her, whose eyes were drawn to the man reclining in a chair near the fireplace. He looked different without the panic of that night. His suit was casual now, his skin healthier, though a trace of fragility lingered. He looked at her with a softness few had ever seen in his gaze. "Eliana," he said, his voice warm but unsteady. "Come closer." She approached timidly, her small shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "You saved my life," David continued, his eyes misting. "Do you understand what that means? If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Eliana shrugged lightly. "I just didn't want you to die." Something in her innocence pierced him deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever had. This child, with nothing, had given everything in that moment. No calculation, no expectation, just pure humanity. He motioned for her to sit. "Eliana, people in my world, they're used to power, to money. They think those things matter most. But you reminded me that none of it means anything if you can't breathe, if you can't live, and I'll never forget that." For the first time since her father left, Eliana felt seen. Not as a poor girl, not as a shadow in the crowd, but as someone who mattered. Her throat tightened. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's something I need you to know, something I can't tell anyone else." He hesitated, as if weighing the words. His whisper carried the weight of confession. "I was ready to give up that night, Eliana. I was tired, so tired of this world where everyone wants something from me. I thought maybe it would be easier to let go. But then I saw your face. You begged me to stay. And in your eyes, I saw something I had forgotten existed. Hope, innocence, a reason to fight. You didn't just save my body, you saved my soul." Tears filled Eliana's eyes before she could stop them. The idea that her small presence had kept this powerful man alive felt overwhelming. She shook her head, whispering, "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything," David said firmly, his own voice breaking. "And because of you, I want to live differently. I want to give back, starting with you." He reached into a folder beside him, pulling out a crisp document. "I want to make sure you have opportunities, education, security, dreams you can actually reach. From today, you'll never have to worry about school fees or hunger again. That's my promise." Eliana's lips trembled. "Why me?" "Because when everyone else walked by," he whispered, leaning close enough for only her to hear, "you stopped. You saw me when I was invisible. And that makes you the richest soul I've ever met." Her tears spilled over. No reward he could give, money, gifts, even a mansion, could mean as much as those whispered words. To be seen, to be valued, to be told she mattered by someone the world idolized, it was more than she had ever dreamed. For a long time, they sat there, two unlikely souls, one small and poor, the other powerful and wealthy, connected by a night when life itself had hung by a thread. And though the world outside remained loud and ruthless, inside, that room had been born, a bond that money could never measure. The days that followed felt like a dream Eliana wasn't sure she was allowed to have. For the first time in her young life, she walked into school without fear of being sent home for unpaid fees. Her backpack was new, her notebooks clean, and her lunchbox filled with more than scraps. The other children noticed, whispering and staring, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. She didn't boast, didn't explain. Deep inside, she held the memory of a whisper that had changed her forever. "You didn't just save my body, you saved my soul." David, too, was transformed. The boardrooms and skyscrapers still demanded his time, but he no longer approached them with the same emptiness. The near-death experience had cracked something open in him, and Eliana's small hands holding him on that pavement replayed in his mind whenever he felt the weight of the world pressing down. He began cutting unnecessary deals, turning away from ventures that exploited the vulnerable. His advisors were baffled, his competitors mocked him, but David was unmoved. For the first time in years, he was living on his own terms, guided not by greed, but by gratitude. He visited Eliana often, sometimes bringing books, sometimes just sitting quietly with her and her mother in their tiny apartment. At first, her mother was wary. Why would a millionaire show up in their crumbling building? But when she heard the story of that night, her skepticism melted into quiet respect. She too had spent her life overlooked, struggling in silence. To see her daughter honored so deeply felt like a miracle she could barely believe. One evening, as rain tapped gently on the windows, David invited them both to dinner at his mansion. Eliana walked through the grand halls in awe, but David insisted they sit not in the vast dining room with its endless table, but in the cozy kitchen where he himself had grown up before wealth consumed his family. "Big rooms are impressive," he told her, pouring tea into simple mugs, "but it's in small spaces that real conversations happen." As they ate, David listened more than he spoke. Eliana's mother told stories of raising a child alone, of working double shifts, of holding on to hope by the thinnest thread. Eliana, shy at first, grew animated as she described her love of reading, her dreams of becoming a doctor so she could save lives the way she had saved his. David leaned forward, truly listening, his eyes brightening with every word. He realized then that wealth had blinded him for too long. He had been surrounded by voices, but none that spoke with honesty and heart. After dinner, he walked Eliana to the garden, where lanterns glowed softly among the roses. The night air was cool, fragrant with blossoms. She tilted her head back to look at the stars, her eyes reflecting their light. "Do you know why I keep remembering that night?" David asked gently. "Because you almost—" She trailed off, not wanting to say the word. "Yes, but more than that," he whispered, leaning close. "Because you didn't just see a millionaire lying there. You didn't see a powerful man. You just saw a human being who needed help. And you gave it without hesitation. That kind of heart is rare, Eliana. Rarer than all the diamonds and gold I could ever buy." Her throat tightened, the weight of his words pressing into her like a blessing she didn't know how to carry. "But I'm just me, just a poor girl." David shook his head, his voice firm but tender. "Never say just. You are not just anything. You are proof that the smallest voice can save the loudest empire. You are proof that courage doesn't ask about bank accounts or last names. You're Eliana, the girl who reminded me why life is worth living. And you are extraordinary." Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were different from the tears of hunger or shame she had known before. These were tears of being seen, valued, cherished. She nodded slowly, clutching those words to her chest as if they were treasures no thief could ever steal. Over the months their bond deepened. David arranged for Eliana to attend one of the city's best schools, not as charity, but as an investment in someone he believed in with all his heart. He set up a scholarship in her name so other children like her could have the same chance. But he never paraded her story for publicity. He kept it private, sacred, something too precious to be turned into headlines. For Eliana, life began to blossom in ways she had never imagined. Yet she remained humble, never forgetting the cracked sidewalks where she had once searched for bottles to sell, never forgetting the silence of nights when her stomach growled louder than her dreams. She carried those memories not as chains, but as wings, knowing they had shaped her into the girl who stopped when no one else did. Years later, at a graduation ceremony, David sat in the front row, clapping with tears in his eyes as Eliana walked across the stage in her cap and gown. She was no longer the fragile 12-year-old she had first seen, but a confident young woman on her way to medical school. As she stepped down, she ran into his arms, whispering, "I made it, because you believed in me." But David shook his head, whispering back, "No, Eliana, I believed in you because you reminded me to believe in myself." That whisper, like the one years ago that had made her cry, sealed a truth she would carry forever. The bond between them was not about saving or being saved. It was about two souls crossing paths at the exact moment they needed each other most. And though the world continued to spin with its noise and greed, somewhere in its heart lived the quiet story of a poor girl and a weary millionaire whose shared moment on a cold night proved that sometimes the smallest hands hold the greatest power.